I said we would start with Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, and I'm not going to talk much about it. I mean, I could literally probably do an entire semester just on this because it's so important for, at the very least, understanding Tolkien's work. And I teach a course on Tolkien and Rowling, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter novels also. But what I want to emphasize, or what I want to pull out of this essay, which is about 60 pages long, are these two parts of it. Okay? Tolkien, in this essay, which he delivered to St. Andrews University, says that fantasy, or what he calls fairy tales, okay, really is for adults. It's not for children. Why? I don't mean the why. Why does Tolkien say that is? Why do you, even if you haven't read Tolkien's essay, and I'm going to assume that most of you probably haven't, why would he make such a claim? Because most people think fairy tales, Little Red Riding Hood, that's meant for who? Children. Well, why do children not need fairy tales? What is a fairy tale? It's a made-up story. That's a made-up story. Star Wars is a made-up story. Star Trek is a made-up story. Every film you see is a made-up story. So what's the difference between those and fairy stories? Do all fairy stories have quote-unquote fairies in them? No. Little Red Riding Hood doesn't. Not a single fairy or elf to be found anywhere. Star Wars doesn't. And I would argue strongly, Star Wars is a fairy tale. Let me back that up. Let me qualify that. The original 3 Star Wars. Forget all the other crap. Especially the middle 3. After the original 3 crap. So, I mean, one of the things he does is he talks about what's a fairy story, you know, because he's kind of like, you know, you got to start with defining your terms. I mean, many undergraduates, they start their paper with a dictionary definition, okay? Tolkien does the exact same thing. He turns to the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, and he says, guess what? It's no help because it doesn't really work. So he says fairy stories are essentially undefinable. That is, what does it mean to define something? Any of you have Latin by any chance, in high school or anything like that? Define comes from Latin. Okay? De means out of or away from. Fine is like finite, or is the root for finite, finitude. If something is finite, it's what? It's limited, right? If it's infinite, it goes on and on and on. So when you define something, you put a limit on it. You put a boundary on it. So, you know, this bottle does what to the water inside? It contains it, right? Because if the bottle wasn't here, if one of you were, you know, a witch or wizard, and you could twinkle your nose or something and make the bottle disappear, what would happen? Here, let me do it like this. Immediately, we both get wet. No, they might get a little wet from splatter, okay? So Tolkien says fairy stories can't be finited, if you want. Kind of like what, I guess we're done. It's kind of like, somebody move around. It's the stupid motion sensor in here. It's kind of like what a Supreme Court justice once said, I think it was Edward O. Douglas, who, when the Supreme Court had a pornography case come before it, he said, I can't define it, but, anybody know how it ends? I know it when I see it. That is, I can't say X, Y, or Z is pornography. But if I see it on here, I can go, that's pornography. Okay? So why take it back to children? Why is it not for children? What's the difference between a 5-year-old boy and a 20-year-old man, or a 5-year-old girl and a 20-year-old woman? What is a difference? I'm not talking about puberty and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I was thinking about like that quote.
Right.
There's no real like they don't have a idea of reality necessarily because of experience.
Okay, you're really, really close. I mean, yeah, you're entirely right about that. Keep going.
They don't have or as much of a like baseline of you said something of like what's real versus what is.
Okay. A 5-year-old doesn't have as much experience as we have, right? And I'm using collective we there. I've got a lot more experience than most of you. I'm 57 next week. Okay? Thank you. Most of you are in your early 20s. Okay? A 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, still lives within an aura kind of wonder. That is, go for a walk. Find some 5-year-old, pick them up from a playground. No, don't do that. Find some 5-year-old that you're related to. Go for a walk in the woods. And what will that 5-year-old do about every 4 or 5 steps? Look! And we'll pick up a rock, a stick, a leaf, a bottle cap, a cigarette container, a cigarette butt, and we'll do what? It's like, wow, an amazing discovery. Whereas, if you're an old fart like me, you look at that and you go, put it down, it's a rock, it's dirty. You don't know what forest animal, has been here. You don't know where that bottle cap has been. You don't. Why? Well, part of it's experience. Difference between 57 and 5 is 52 more years of living in the world as it appears under the sun. And how is the world as it appears under the sun to a 50-year-old or even a 20-year-old as opposed to a 5-year-old? Let me qualify that a little bit. Most 5-year-olds. Because I know there are 5-year-olds who don't have a 5-year-old childhood. There are 5-year-olds who are emotionally 50-year-olds because they've had to deal with so much already by the age of 5. And there are 50-year-olds who are 5-year-olds because they've been so protected. They've never seen the world. Okay? Tolkien says fairy stories aren't meant for children for the simple reason children already believe. You can tell a child any story, and what will the kid ask? Is it real? Did that really happen? But you tell a story to a 50-year-old or a 20-year-old, and more than likely, the eyes are going to roll. Yeah, right. That could never happen. Not in my world, not in my realm of experience. So, Tolkien says real fairy stories are written for adults. Why? We need them. We need them. Children don't. Because we've been accustomed to looking through these, whether you wear these or not. We all have a set of lenses that we wear. And those lenses are grimy and dirty and mucked over with the experience of life. 5-year-olds don't have that. Children, primarily, don't have that. Okay? So, he says, what fairy stories offer to us... Shut up, Siri. I want the time. Offer to us is these 4 things. Us, adults. He says fairy stories offer to adults, if they're done right, fantasy, recovery, escape, and consolation. So what does he mean by those? Fantasy. How many of you have ever read any of these books? Anybody? Okay. How many of you have ever read any work of fantasy? What?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. What else?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. Okay. What else? Chronicles of Narnia, anybody? What if maybe you haven't read fantasy? Have you seen any fantasy, like a film? What? Star Wars? What else? Spider-Man? Is Spider-Man fantasy? Ah, interesting. No, yes. Why is it fantasy? Is it real? No, it's not real. Okay? Or the Avengers. Really? Is some blonde Australians, Nordic, god really going to come from another world and rescue planet Earth? No. So it's, in that sense, it's kind of fantasy. Tolkien defines fantasy a couple of ways. One, arresting strangeness. What did Tolkien write before he wrote The Lord of the Rings? The Hobbit. How does The Hobbit begin? You know?
Unexpected journey.
That's the title of the chapter. It's good. It's in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Summer of 1931, he's grading entrance papers for Oxford University. Entrance exams. You have to pass exam to get into it. Okay? And he's sitting in his garage study, the study over his garage. He's got the windows open, nice breeze. And he's just read a student's paper, and he turns the page over in the blue book. Just like the blue books you can get from the bookstore. Turns the page over and writes in pencil. I've held this thing in my hand. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Didn't have a clue what it meant. And went on to the next exam. But that phrase stuck in his mind. What's a hobbit? Tolkien had never seen that word before. He doesn't invent it. We now know it existed in the 19th century. Right? But he had not seen it. He just writes, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And being a storyteller, he wants to figure out what's the hobbit and why does it live in a hole in the ground. And so he starts to work story after story after story. He tells them to his children. He starts to write drafts. He reads them to his friends. And it becomes The Hobbit in 1937, which then kind of becomes The Lord of the Rings, even though The Lord of the Rings had already been begun, etc., etc. Okay? That's arresting strangeness. In 1977, 2 films came out, spring of 1977, that began with arresting strangeness. One by George Lucas, one by Steven Spielberg. Spielberg's came out first, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And in George Lucas's Star Wars. And Star Wars, see, you're all completely deadened to the wonder of the very first Star Wars, when you had mile-long lines. I'm from California, from San Jose, California, which in 1977 was the #1 movie ticket sales area in the country. Why? Because it had the most expensive tickets. And to get into Star Wars, you had to get in line for a mile. Fortunately, we knew a guy who owned one of the movie theaters, and we got in a little bit quicker. But to be there, first time Dolby was used. First time Dolby surround sound was used. To be there and have that sound in the theater, and then to see, what in the world? Words moving from the bottom of the screen up and disappearing. And then have that juxtaposed with a spaceship come down from the top of the screen down. And the spaceship looked like what? I don't mean just the shape. Like a spaceship that hadn't just come off the factory line. See, when 2001 A Space Odyssey came out in the 1960s, 1968 I think it was, all the spaceships were just sparkling, like they'd just been painted. But when that Star Cruiser comes in, it's got what on it? Blast marks. Okay? Arresting strangeness. So, that's the first part. And Tolkien goes into a whole lot more about that. So, recovery. What's recovery? Recovery is the regaining of a clear view. What does that mean? Notice there's a couple important words there. Regaining, clear view. What's the re in regaining mean? I've had it before. We've had a clear view before. When? Keep going. When we were young. When we were children. So what's the clear view? It's that sense of wonder. It's that looking out. Today's not a good day. Give it a couple months. It's that looking out and seeing trees full of life. Seeing the daffodils pop up through the ground. Seeing that rock and go, whoa, cool. Why? Because that rock suddenly is infused with more than just rockness. It has a sense of what C.S. Lewis calls glory about it. That is, the little kid doesn't ever look at anything and say that thing is just the thing. There's always more to it. There's always something else to it. So, recovery is a regaining of a clear view. Seeing things, Tolkien says, as we were meant to see them. And in this part, what he really emphasizes is us seeing each other. Not just rocks and trees and birds and that kind of stuff, but each other. As we are meant to see each other. That is, I'm not meant, Tolkien would say, to see you simply as students. Because what does that do to you? Makes you a group. Or, let's see. I'm going to cut you off. Women. Why? It makes you a group. Rather than individual. What's the difference? I would argue one of the problems in our culture today, in our society today, is we tend to do what? We divide everybody into groups. We say, oh, Native American, African American, Asian American, something - American. Or we say men, women, trans, whatever. Rather than person. Individual with a name, with a history, with a background, all that. See, because when I said, we all wear these, what make these up? What make up, partially at least, my lenses that I wear that she doesn't wear, and I don't know your name yet. My family, that is, my current family, wife, 4 kids, the family I was born into, the time I was born, the place I was born into, the socioeconomic status I was born into, the political ideology, if you want, I was born into, the spiritual ideology I was born, all of that goes into making up these lenses. So Tolkien says, I need to get rid of these lenses. Why? I need to learn to see the world the way it really is. Interesting little Harry Potter note. No, we're not going to finish this. The very last book, near the end of the Harry Potter series, near the end of the very last book, Harry wakes up in the chapter titled King's Cross. All of you with me? Those of you who read Harry Potter, you know where I'm talking about? Okay? After he's walked into the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort kills him, Harry wakes up, he's in King's Cross. What 2 important physical characteristics does Harry have in that chapter? no glasses, and no scar. Why? Because he now sees as he is meant to see. He's now, quote unquote, perfect, healed. Which is why, in that chapter, he can go on or he can go back. Okay? Recovery, seeing as we are meant to see. Escape. Now, I bet a lot of you thought, oh, fantasy literature, this is all going to be escapist stuff. All good stuff, get a check out from reality for a while, and then, Well, Tolkien says that's kind of one meaning of escape. And he says a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues, for example, what a useless subject. State legislators, why are you teaching fantasy literature? I mean, you ought to be teaching real literature, Shakespeare and Hemingway, and et cetera, et cetera. I teach Shakespeare also. Tolkien says it's the difference, this kind of escape, between the flight of the prisoner and the flight of the deserter. Well, what's a deserter doing? Leaving his or her appointed post, right? Someone who deserts their position in the military. That is, they've got a set job and they're like, I don't want to do it. What about a prisoner? You can be wrongly imprisoned, right? You can be rightfully imprisoned. Does that mean, let's say you've done something horrible. You killed somebody and you go to prison. Does that mean while you're in prison, your whole purpose is just sit there and go, oh, I'm such a horrible person. I deserve everything I got. Not necessarily. I mean, hopefully you would come to that realization. But it also means that maybe while you are in prison, you learn to do what with lemons? Make lemonade. You learn to make the most of the situation. That's the flight of the prisoner. And when Tolkien's talking about prisoner, he's talking more like a prisoner of war. What's a prisoner of war? It used to be, at least. First job. Try to escape. Try to escape. Try to get back to your unit. But he goes on and says, what is it do we want to escape from? Ultimately. What does everybody want to try to escape from? He calls it the great escape. Death. Death. Why do we have a however many billion dollar industry of, supplements, life extension stuff, plastic surgery? It's trying to, prolong youth. Okay? What are the two constants we know in life? Death and taxes. You gotta pay them. Okay? But he says that's, death is the great escape. What are some other littler things we'd like to escape from? How many of you are kind of pressed right now financially? Yeah. Yeah, really. Yeah. What else? Hatred? Bigotry? Racism? Prejudice? Injustice? Hunger? Poverty? Those are all things we would like to... sorry, I'm not going to say you do. Those are all things I would like to be able to escape from. I wished I lived in a world where there were none of those things. But guess what? If wishes were pennies, I'd be a millionaire. Because they're not. Does that mean we have to simply say, yep, that's the way the world is? No. 2 more minutes. So fairy stories, they do these, and they offer this. Consolation. What is a consolation? What's a consolation prize? A consolation award. You're in an athletic tournament, and you get the consolation award. What does that mean?
You participated.
You participated. I used to, tell this to my kids when I coach Soccer. I didn't tell it to the whole team. I told it to my kids when they were on the team. It means you suck. Why? Because you didn't win. I mean, silver and bronze in the Olympics, you lost. Gold is for the winners. Okay? So, what's the consolation fairy stories offer? In a word, Tolkien creates this word. Eucatastrophe. We'll talk about this more on Wednesday. It's hope. Fairy stories offer hope. When everything else in the world offers the barrel of a gun. Fairy stories say it'll get better. This isn't all there is. Look at the middle, Star Wars. And then the third. The middle Star Wars ends with what? Let's stop with this. What does Luke learn? Papa is Satan. My father is Satan. I mean, that's what Darth Vader is, essentially. Okay? Hope? Does he have much hope? He's lost an arm. His best friend's frozen. Yeah, okay, he's got the girl. She's his sister, but he doesn't know it, you know. Kind of weird. You never know what goes on between then and the next one. Okay? Not much hope. But you get the third one. And what happens? He confronts Darth Vader. And what do we see there on the bridge of that one ship? He lets himself be captured. He sees Darth Vader. He talks to him. And what does he tell him? There is still good in you. I can feel it. Feeling? That's not science fiction. That's fantasy. What does Darth Vader say? Nope. He doesn't say, no, you're wrong, son. There's no good in me. I love being evil. He says, it's too late. But as the film shows, it's not too late, is it? Even in the darkest moments, there's still hope. Okay? All right, we'll stop there. We'll finish talking about this. We'll talk about that briefly as we discuss the book of 3. If I scared you with the first part of the syllabus, try not to be.